Okay. So what I wanted to do today was I'm going to go through a mix and just have you guys watch, and you can totally, of course, ask questions and things like that. But I figured this would be a good way to give you guys some ideas for your own mixes. And it will solidify any things that you're maybe a little bit confused about right now. Let me just do a couple things here. Ooh. Oh, let's do this. This will work. Okay, this is actually a session that I did yesterday at Orange Studio, local studio. I'm not going to be able to see the chat, so you're going to need to unmute yourselves to actually talk to me. Okay? Okay, so you should be hearing me through the stream. Of course, there's going to be a little bit of a lag, but you should be hearing me through the stream. Okay. Anybody? You hearing me in the stream? Okay, cool. Awesome. Cool. Okay. Cool. And that delay's not too bad. Awesome. Great. Okay, so you should be seeing Pro Tools on your screen. I'm going to deal with the last song here. And I'm going to full screen this so we can see what we got going here. Let me hide all this stuff. Actually, for this particular purpose, I'm just going to delete it. Sorry, I thought I saved a clean version of this session without any extra stuff in it for this purpose, but apparently I did not. Oops. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so this window right here is something that's important. If you go up to the setup menu, it'll open up this window here. For what we're doing, if the computer's ever acting up on you, like it's especially if it's crashing, this hardware buffer size should be at 1024. For everything we do, it should stay there, and that should be the default. So if the computer's acting funny, check that playback engine. Again, it's under the setup window menu. Make sure that you've got it at 1024. It'll make a huge difference to how Pro Tools behaves. Yeah, Pro Tools. I just rebuilt my laptop, so it's got all sorts of weirdness going on in here. Okay. Let me wipe out everything here. Actually, I'm going to leave that one in place because it just keeps me from blowing you away. So I think that's probably a good thing. Okay, so I will just leave it at this. I'm not going to start over on this. I've already got, of course, get rid of my set of sentence and inserts. I don't need that many. This is my rough mix, basically, that I have going. Let me listen to that real quick, and we're going to use this last tune, which is a... no, we can't use that last tune because it's a Stevie Wonder track, and YouTube would shut me down. That's not... Oh, wait. No, it's a cover, so it shouldn't shut me down. We should be okay to use this one, actually. Okay, looks like I got a set. Oops, I know what I did wrong. It's on my end. There we go. Okay, so before we even start, this is something that I haven't talked about, and I find this to be actually a very important thing. The master fader, create a master fader in all of your sessions. There's no downside to creating a master fader in your sessions because it makes one in the background anyway. So go ahead and use it, but don't touch the master fader. There's a good reason not to. And I'll explain exactly what it is. So for most of these channels, your audio starts from the top down and it goes through the plugins, and then you adjust the level here. The master fader is the only fader in Pro Tools that the plugins come after the fader. So if I do compression on the master fader, which we're not really ready to do anyway, but if you do compression on the master fader and you turn down the fader, you've changed your threshold because you've just changed where how the mix is hitting the compressor. So it's don't mess with that for right now. Okay, the other thing about this is that when I play this back, you're going to notice that it's going to average down here around 20. Now, I know Jimmy, you're in there. If you don't mind, make sure that this is set up this way. I'm going to go to Preferences, and I'm going to go to the Metering tab, and the master meters, put them on K20. It's don't mess with that for right now. The master fader, okay. You said the other thing about this is that when I play this back, I can't hear you. You're going to notice it's going to average down here around. Sorry. Yeah, turn me down on that. What'd you say?
Oh, answering the question on the stream. It's confusing.
Oh, gotcha. Wait, no. Let me just switch over. That makes total sense. If I do that, I can take the question on the stream. Okay, there we go. I'm sorry, on the... what was the question? What was your question? Oh, put it in the chat. That's faster, because that's real time.
On the master fader, you said that the effects come after the fader?
Correct.
They don't come before the fader?
No. They do on every channel except for the master fader.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. It's a weird part of it. So yeah. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to the stream. Okay, so here, you're going to want to be in the metering tab. Under master meters, change it to K20. Okay? And then that's all you got to do. Now, you're going to notice that these numbers changed here. Okay? Now, the reason we did this is see where the 0 is? You want your mix to hang out right around 0. Okay? So let's see if mine does. Yep, it does. So there's a reason for that. Now, the other thing is that might seem a little bit loud to you. In reality, it's not. When you're in the studio, the volume knob on the interface that is on the right in the rack, there's 3 knobs on the far right. It should be the first of those 3, I believe. The other 2 are head levels. Leave it 12 o'clock. Leave it straight up. So the reason for that is that this is what's called calibrated monitoring. So remember that we talked about Fletcher-Munson, the whole equal loudness contour thing. Well, the problem is that if you start changing the level of your speakers during a mix, then you're actually going to you're changing your perception of the mix. Every time you touch that level control for your master fader, you're basically starting over. So don't touch the that's actually the reason that the interface is kind of out of your reach, because I don't want to tempt you to grab it and turn it up and turn it down, because you're actually not doing yourself any favors when you do that. So leave that fader where it is. It's a good thing for it to be. It's a good thing for it to be where it is. Just making a connection on something here. So leave the master fader alone, and leave your the monitor control in the studio alone, because you want that to be where I've set it, basically, is what I'm getting at with that. Okay, so let me do this real quick. Trying to put myself. Anyway, there we go. I just wanted that for the sake of if I need to make any kind of hand gesture to explain anything here. Okay, so what we're doing here is I've got my mix. I want it to sit around 0. This means that the level you're going to hear in the studio is going to be at about 80, actually it's closer to 83 dB is what it should be calibrated for. Also, there are volume controls on the Genelecs. Those should stay all the way up all the time. People dick with them all the time. Pardon my French. Ticks me off. Just leave them all the way up. They should be all the way up. We'll talk about that why later. But you want to start mixing at this level. Now, there is a huge precedent for this. The motion picture film industry set this standard. Every movie you have ever seen has been mixed in a room with this standard. So if you can get your mix to sit around here, then the idea is you get used to mixing at that level, and you have a better perception of what you're actually doing. Like if you're mixing a ballad and it's really loud in that room, then you're probably mixing that ballad too loud, right? And you should start pulling down faders, and you should start, chilling out on some of this stuff. If you're mixing a metal tune and all the meters are showing up down here, then maybe you should turn things up. So it gives you a very objective concept of where you're at when you're mixing. So that's the point of staying with this. Okay, so I started by just simply doing level controls and panning. This is a crucial part of, I'm going to get rid of this track I don't need. This is a crucial part of doing your mix. Sometimes people jump right into plugins. No. You want to get it as balanced as you possibly can with nothing but the faders and the panning knobs. So let me check this again. I'm actually getting a little hot with all this, so I'm going to back off a little bit. Let's go back and... Okay. The other thing that you're probably noticing right now is that it tells me that if the tracks that I got have reverb on them already. And this SPD is actually it's a Roland drum pad with samples in it. So those clicks that you're hearing are actually samples. And there's obviously reverb on it. There's obviously also reverb on, it actually wasn't a Korg Triton, it was a different keyboard. But the keyboard, the synthesizer input is obviously has reverb on it too, because I have not done a single thing anywhere. Right, so you can hear the reverb on that. Okay. Now, the next thing I wanted to take a quick look about here, I'm going to mute the stuff that is not drums. Now, an important thing to do as I start giving you sessions with more and more drum tracks is to start by listening to the overheads. Okay? Because the overheads are literally overhead, and as a result, they pick up everything. So any choices you make with the other channels have to be in conjunction with the overhead. So my floor tom is on my left, my hi-hat's on my right, kick and snare down the middle, right? So because of that, you can look at my choices. My floor tom low, is on the left, right? Because it needs to match what's in the what's in the overheads. Otherwise, you're going to have this weird fighting for where the imaging is. So you want to match your toms to your, especially your toms, and also things like your hi-hat, if you mic the ride, those kind of things. You want to make sure that they match the overhead. Otherwise, things sound funny. Right, so that this tom fill is going from right to left. Right to left. And then I'm going to turn my toms on. Right, so now the toms are filling out, the single microphones are filling out the sound, but they still have that same panning. So make sure that when you pan stuff, that, and the hi-hat's on the right, right? So now everything matches my overheads. Okay. Get rid of the overheads. There we go. I still have a workable drum sound, except I would have no cymbals. So the overheads do have to still be in there. Now, the SPD is a drum pad, so there's no acoustic precedent for where that goes. So for me, when a track has a lot of hi-hat on one side, if I have something like this, I'll put it on the opposite side, right? Makes sense that it would fill in that space. So if I go back to... actually, I don't think I have a great example. Yeah, I don't have a great example because he used it really sparingly in the session. He didn't really use it much during grooves. It was more of a special effect thing. But still, I decided to put it on the opposite side. Okay, so I've got that done. I've got some levels here. Now, the first thing that I want to do here is I want to deal with... Actually, let's stick with the drums. First thing I'm going to do here is if I hold the Option key, it lets me put a plugin in every slot. I'm going to choose my EQ one band. Okay, this is that same EQ we have been using, except there's only one band to it. It's real simple. I'm going to look at my overheads. Now, the only thing that is really crucial in the overheads is cymbals, and cymbals do not have low frequency content in them. So I am going to high pass. I'm going to choose my high pass, and it will default to 1K, which is way overkill. I'm going to go to like 100 hertz, because remember, 100 hertz is pretty much good for anything. And it gets rid of a little bit of the kick drum, which means that when I put the kick drum in, I'm not going to have to worry about the bleed from the kick drum causing a phase issue, and it makes my kick drum sound tighter if I take the kick drum sound out of the overheads. High toms also don't have a whole lot of stuff in there. I'm also going to I'm going to take the high tom off at 200 hertz. Now I'm picking arbitrary numbers for the sake of just keeping things moving. I would spend more time, I would suggest you guys spend more time listening to those individual drums and finding something that sounds good to you. I'm going to put 200 on the high tom, 100 on the mid tom, and I'm going to actually make the floor tom like 75 hertz, because sometimes it's nice for the floor tom to have a little bit of bottom end to it. But I'm going to get rid of that. Hi-hat, honestly, I usually go in here and I will crank this thing up as high as 400 hertz because it's hi-hat. There's no low end in a hi-hat. Right? That's all I care about. But you can kick, snare, all that low end stuff. I don't need any of it. I'm going to get rid of it. Snare also doesn't really have much in the way of low end. Getting rid of that at 100 hertz. Kick drum, believe it or not, I still put a high pass on it. Definitely not at 1K, but more like 40 hertz, because there will be some things down here, but nobody in there, most listeners cannot reproduce things below about 45 hertz or 50 hertz. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go even simpler, and I'm going to say 50 hertz here. You can even go up as high as 60. Nothing down there is going to be useful for most people unless you're doing some kind of movie where you know that they have a subwoofer and they're listening on a nice system. We'll talk more about that later, but don't be afraid to high pass even bass instruments. So with that done, I'm going to play the drum set, again. And I'm going to turn the high pass on and off. And you're going to, again, see how much difference that makes just with that. Especially if you're in the studio, you'll hear that there's a bunch of kind of junk. Just gets a little bit tighter, a little bit crisper, a little bit more defined. Okay? So, put that back a little bit. Okay, now, I like to deal with my drums just to kind of know what I've got, but the next place I go is not bass, it's actually the vocal, because the vocal is going to be incredibly important to us. Now, I'm going to get rid of the... Actually, I'm going to leave this, and I'm going to go ahead and put a high pass on her. I have a female vocal here. I'm actually going to go to 150 hertz. Males, I usually start around 120 and check it out, but females, I go a little bit higher, and I listened to her for 4 hours yesterday. I know darn well that she doesn't have any bottom end in her voice, so I'm going to go ahead and high pass her at 150, and we're going to look at that.
Discover you feel like me. If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy.
Okay, so if you're probably noticing that the first issue I've got is that she's quiet and then loud and quiet and then loud. So let's look at compression. I definitely want to compress her. Let me make this bigger to see with everybody. There we go. I'm going to get rid of this track because there is no Wurlitzer keyboard in this particular track. And actually, for our intensive purposes, well, no, let's just leave it. Okay, there we go. So, great, we're into that. FYI, it says Mojave. That's because that's the microphone that we're listening to. We put 2 microphones on her so that I could decide later which one I liked better, and I'm using the one. It's a Mojave MA200, I think, if I recall correctly.
Discover you feel like me.
Now, again, don't use your eyes to make decisions. I'm just going to check the chat, make sure. Oh, good God. Yeah, turn those Genelecs back up. That I can't believe people... Anyway. Irks me. Oh, unless you guys turned them down for the sake of not feeding back on the thing. I get that. Anyway, so again, I don't recommend that you make decisions by what you see, and you need to make decisions based on what you hear. But I am going to point something out here. I'm going to click on this gray bar here, which you've seen me do a couple times. I'm going to tell it to fit to window, and it will make that vocal take the entire page, which is great. Okay, now as I look at this, you can just tell by looking at it. Again, I'm not making a decision because of this. I listened to it first, but this just...
With the Genelecs, it's more of no one's turned them down. They've been down since we got here.
Oh.
But whenever you have the Focusrite at 12 o'clock, even at the level that they're at, they're blowing you away.
Okay, something changed in there. Then turn it down to something more realistic, and I'll go in there and recalibrate them. Okay, so I will do that. I'll do that before next Tuesday. I don't know if I'll be able to, and I'll text you guys to let you know for sure that what to expect when you go in there. Okay, so again, I'm not making a choice based on what I see, but I'm making a choice based on what I hear. I heard that there were a lot of volume changes, and that is confirmed by looking at what's here, right? I got a lot of stuff going on. This is a nice little chunk right here that we're going to look at. Okay, so this tells me that her average level floats around here, okay? And then the this is the loud stuff. Now, what I really want to do is I want to squash, if you drew a line right here, I want to squash that. I want to keep that from getting too loud because it will allow me to bring up the quieter part of it without making the loud parts super loud on me anymore. Okay, so I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to grab a plug-in here. I'm actually going to go ahead and grab the BF76, which you guys should have. Real quick, you guys in the studio, do we have the CL76? I can't remember if I've asked you this before. If you can look in the menu, you're looking for it. It's actually CLA76 is what you want. It should be under Dynamics. Awesome. Good. To be quite honest, the BF76 that Pro Tools comes with is kind of crap. I'll come right out and say it. It's got its uses, but they're few and far between. The CLA 76 is a much nicer version of it. Okay, so I'm going to start with that Dr. Pepper setting I've talked about. Okay, so we're 10, 2, and 4. 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock. And then I'm going to set my level. In the 1176, remember that the way the 1176 works is there's no threshold. You have to turn the input up to meet the threshold. So what I want to do is when she's singing quiet, I don't really want it to do anything, but I want it to kick in when she sings loud.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy.
Didn't even have to touch it. That's exactly what it's doing for me. So let me turn it off and listen to it bypassed and then in.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy.
Right? I want to tell you just kind of jumps out at me and it's super annoying. So let's listen to it with.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy.
Much more useful. And when I put it back into the mix, in my rough mix.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy.
Right? Now it sits right in the mix and I don't have to worry about it. Yay. Okay. Now, this is not the session I'm going to give you. So don't, because I'd be giving away all the secrets. I'm going to give you something different. But one problem I'm having with this one is that there's a really annoying like 4K thing in her voice. So I'm going to find that.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy.
Right there. I don't know if you heard that. It's pretty, drive me nuts. So I'm going to pull that out. When you're making a corrective change, and I think I may have forgotten to tell you guys this, if you're making a corrective change and you're specifically getting rid of one frequency, then you really want to go narrow with your cue. The point of that is that you want to just get rid of the problem frequency, but you want to leave everything else alone. Now, in practice, wait a minute, why don't I have a high pass? Because I've already done it, right? It's somewhere else. So know that there is an overall thing happening here that's not represented in this one. There's also a little bit of a low mid thing I want to deal with her.
If you should discover this dream is for two.
That I don't like either. So now that I've found the frequency, I'm going to pull it out a little bit. Now, I would really like to see everything that's going on, right? There's a cool trick to do that. If you go down to the bottom here, there's this pull-up menu. Choose the EQ curve. It will show you the overall resulting EQ curve in the mix window. Very, very cool. The only downside to this, if you're using the built-in EQs like this, it will show up in that EQ curve. Every now and then, if I use a third-party EQ, sometimes it will not register, but most of them do. So if you're sticking with the stuff you're used to, you can get a feel for what happens if you have an EQ before a compressor and after a compressor. Although if you just mentally remember that, you can do it that way too. Okay, so I've got her in a decent space. The drums are decent. Let's also now look at my bass.
If you should discover this dream is for two,
I can hear in my headphones that there's like this super low rumble that is kind of cool, but most people don't have expensive studio headphones. So I need to tame that down and make that more reasonable. Now, I think I don't know if I mentioned this as well, so this is also a good time to mention some of these things. The reason that I put this high pass over here before I did this, well, first I wanted to show you the high pass, but in addition to that, low frequencies will trigger a compressor. If I turn off that high pass, any low-end bleed coming into her microphone may make the compressor work. And I don't want the compressor to react to things that are not in her voice. Because if I had removed the low end from her voice after the compressor would be activating on things that I'm not even hearing. So if I get rid of it first, then compress, then do this, it ends up giving me a better result. The other thing about this is that if you look on most analog consoles, and I'm not in the studio today, I'll show you on Tuesday. This is why if you buy an external microphone preamplifier, it has a built-in high pass on the mic pre, because a lot of times the high pass is actually separate from the EQs. It's in the mic pre, so that you can actually you can cut that crap out before it ever even gets to before it ever even gets to before it even ever even gets to you. There we go. Now I've got a better looking video for me. Okay, not that you really need to see my side of my head. Anyway, okay, so great, we got that going. I'm going to roll off a little bit of the bass so that we don't end up with this sub bass stuff that just muddies the mix.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy, if you should discover this dream is.
Now, I don't know, based on what you're listening to this on, if you can notice that, but what I notice is that the bass actually feels tighter. It still has plenty of low end, but it gets rid of that rumbly sub stuff, and it just makes it tighter sounding, which also allows me to go in here and the downside of having a bunch of plugins is your lists get long. It's kind of annoying, actually. So now let's compress this puppy a little bit. I'm going to start giving you a couple little tips and tricks here. If you start with a 4-to-1 ratio on a bass, you can usually get it to sit really nicely in the mix. You just got to find where you put it in the threshold.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you.
There we go. And I'm not getting more than 60 dB of compression, just like I told you guys when we did compression. Trying to not get more than that. Just get a little bit. It just gives it a subtle little thing that that just lets it sit in the mix a little bit better. And it'll actually sometimes allow you to actually turn it down and it still stays present. So
if you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you.
Cool. So I like that. Now there's something else I want to do to the bass. Now the tone of his bass has a little bit of a bite to it, so I'm going to put an EQ in here and I'm going to bring that bite out so that it kind of cuts through the mix a little bit. So it should be up here. When I'm doing funk type stuff, I usually start looking in that 300 to 400 hertz range. That stuff. I'm not going to give you this song, but I will try to find like a funk tune so you can play with this stuff because it's really fun to do. I want that nasty grit. It's cool. Okay, so when you put it back in the mix.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell.
It's more overt when you listen to the bass by itself, but when you put it in the mix, it just adds that little grit that kind of pushes it through. Now, I'm going to do something maybe a little bit weird here. I'm going to switch the low frequency over to a bandpass filter, and I'm going to find, actually, let me look at it this way. I think it's more practical for me to talk about it this way. Okay, so I'm going to put an EQ. I'm going to leave space in case I decide to put a compressor on the kick drum here in a minute. What I want to do is I want to find a sweet spot for my kick drum.
If you should discover.
Okay, this is a common issue, and it's what we call the basketball sound. It sounds like you're banging, it sounds like you're bouncing a basketball that's kind of overinflated, and it kind of has that boom, boom kind of sound. We don't want that in kick drums. That stuff. There we go. And don't be afraid. Sometimes you got to make a big cut to get it out. It's actually sitting around 500 on this bass drum. That doesn't mean it's going to be there every time. It just depends on the kick drum. And then I want to add some bottom end. I'm not liking it with this filter. Let's try it with this one. Oops. Okay, this is one downside. I can't go any further, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to really quickly Just put in 500. I'm basically just going to replace that other filter by typing in the values into this one, and then I can have the orange one back. Just checking where that is. Okay, that's okay. Okay, so I like what this kick drum has. Yeah, around 75 hertz. So, typical EQ, if I want to make space for that so that I don't have to, so I can hear it better, I'm going to take that 75 hertz out of the bass guitar.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy.
Whoops.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy. If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy. If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy. If you should discover.
Sorry, I grabbed that filter and got rid of my funk. Put that back in the yellow filter. 75 hertz is where we wanted the bass drum, so I'm going to actually take just a hint of it out of the bass. And this is going to be subtle, but it's going to let the kick drum come through a little bit.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy. If you should discover this dream is for two.
So what you want to hear, what you're hopefully hearing there, is that the kick drum kind of, it's a little bit less present, and then when I turn that cut on in the bass drum becomes more present. So it's a weird phenomenon, but it works.
If you should discover this dream is for two.
Okay, and to prove it to you, let's actually just remove that stuff for a second.
If you should discover this dream is for two.
See, kick and bass is just kind of muddy, just kind of indistinct.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you.
And I do that, and suddenly I have this little boost here. The bass has a little bit of bite. It makes room. The kick drum's got some fatness. It makes a big difference. So make sure you're sharing those frequency ranges between all of the different instruments. Okay, so let's also look at the keyboard now.
If you should discover this dream is.
I can't remember if I told you guys about this, but one thing I've noticed with keyboards, and I actually learned this from somebody else who pointed it out to me, and ever since then I can't unhear it. Keyboards are designed to sound good in the store, so that when people are playing keyboards, they play the one that sounds the most attractive. The problem with that is that they aren't designed to sound good inside your mix, which is a big problem because that's where you're going to use them unless you sit at home all day just playing your keyboard. So what do? They tend to put a little bit of push around 1K because that's where the human voice is and that's what we're sensitive to, because that makes the keyboard sound more attractive. So without I shouldn't say without there are always exceptions, but very often I find that pulling a little bit out of 1K can make a difference between a synthesizer keyboard sitting in a mix or not. So let's see what happens with this one.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you.
I can, it's subtle, but it gets out of the way of the vocal because it just drives me nuts that it does that. Now, do they all do this? No. The ones that don't are, sorry, getting ahead of myself. The ones that don't are the ones that were designed to be professional keyboards, basically because a professional would know better. So I don't know if you guys have seen the Nord keyboard, N-O-R-D. It's got a red top. It's a really nice keyboard. It's got a red top, and then the tone wheels are actually wood. It's like a really nice keyboard. That one doesn't have this problem because it was designed for professionals, and they get that you shouldn't put a spike there. But a lot of those Yamaha keyboards, especially like Casios and Rolands, they do it all the time. We also have a piano MIDI instrument inside Pro Tools. That one doesn't do it either because it knows that it's going to be in mixes too. So try it, see if it helps, but be critical of it. Don't just expect it to work. Now, keyboards typically have a good amount of bottom end to them as well. So we've got,
If you should,
like, when he hits the keys, there's some like sub bass stuff going on in there. Again, sounds great by itself, but it won't work in my mix. So I'm going to do a high pass here. And one thing to note is that I don't want a steep one because I want to kind of keep the vibe of that low end. I just want it out of the way of all of my other, I just want to get it out of the way of my kick and my bass. So if I do that, yeah, this is actually a Fender Rhodes. That's the kind of keyboard they're emulating. And this is more what a Fender Rhodes actually sounds like.
if you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy.
There we go. So I'd like to make a point now. Oh, and I did the high pass in there, so I'm going to get rid of it there just so we kind of a mental note that we don't have a high pass there. Okay, I want to make a note here that all I've done is panning, volume, and a bunch of high pass, 4 EQs, and 2 compressors. That's all I've done.
If you should discover this dream is for two, I want to tell you, boy.
I would not run screaming away from that, right? You can get a long way with a little bit. Think about what you're doing. Be deliberate about what you're doing. Usually if you find that you are putting, so you've probably noticed that if you come down to this menu, you can add up to 10 inserts. My personal view is that I break this rule sometimes, but in general, if you need more than 5 plugins, you're doing something wrong. Okay, so if you've gotten to that point, start over. Ditch them all and come back and try to make it happen. Even in my personal mix, let's actually look at this real quick. So I'm going to save the class mix, but I'm going to open my mix that I've been working on for this session. Oh, I was doing something specific with all that, so got to put it all back. All my reverbs and everything. Put the vocal back where it goes. Now I've got a bunch of sends. Most of these I'm not using. We'll get to that. But that's all the plugins I have. Now, there are some problems with this vocal that I've been dealing with. That's why there's so many plugins on the vocal. But for the most part, there's like no more than 2 plugins on, except for the vocal, there's no more than 2 plugins on any of this. Okay, I did do a weird thing over here with some plugins, but if you actually look at the plugins, I'm doing a 2 dB boost at 140 with this plugin, and that's all I'm doing. It's just because that particular filter sounds that way. So in the perfect world, you shouldn't, less is more, is basically what I'm getting at there. Let's go back to this mix. Great. Okay. So now we're here. Let's talk about, oh, that's weird to put that stuff back. I don't want that. Okay. So, let's do a reverb. That'll go a long way towards filling things out a little bit. So here's how you deal with a reverb. The first thing that I find easy to do is go into your sends. I'm going to hold the option key, and you'll hear me say option key a lot because we use it a lot because it lets you do something to every channel at once. So if I hold the option key, go to my sends, I'm going to choose bus 1. Just going to make a bus 1. I'm also going to go make a bus 2 while I'm here, just for giggles. Okay? Now that I've done that, I'm going to go make a new, here's the important part, auxiliary input, not an audio track. This is what usually gets people in trouble. Make sure it's an auxiliary input. I'm going to go ahead and name it verb. Okay? Mono auxiliary inputs verb. and it puts it right there. Oops, I forgot to make a second one. Little trick in Pro Tools. The last thing I made was an auxiliary input. If I just double click in the gray area, it makes another one of the thing that I just made. So I'm going to call this verb 2. And before I go on, I'm going to check and make sure. Oh, the 10-4 on the CLA 76. Sorry, I'm just now catching this. The 10-4 is just a rough setting to get you started. Basically, what that is on an 1176 is that it's a slightly longish attack, a very fast release, and a moderate amount of compression. It's just a good kind of generic starting point. And yeah, and of course you can move it from there to change it to get whatever you want, but it's just a good starting point. I've tried that. When I first heard about that trick, I literally just did an entire session with nothing but the Dr. Pepper setting, the 10-2-4 thing, and I put it on everything. And once, of course, you have to set the input to get the threshold right, but you can almost make an entire mix. I mean, you really kind of can just make an entire mix with that Dr. Pepper setting, just being, a little bit conservative about how much compression you get, but literally it will work for everything. It's more fun to dig in a little bit deeper and find some stuff that's something that's maybe even a little bit more flattering, but it totally works. It's just one of those few things you're going to find. There's very few things. Doing a high pass on everything at 100 hertz except for bass and kick and the Dr. Pepper setting are honestly the only two general tricks that always work off the top of my head. So that's it. That's the extent of my tricks. So, okay. So we're going to go to the reverbs, and I've got verb 1 and verb 2, and I'm going to, the inputs are now going to be bus 1 and bus 2, because we made sends for bus 1 and bus 2. Now, something worth noting. Notice that I made the sends on my tracks before I made my verb, because I don't want a send on my verb. Because if I take the bus 1 output and I send it to my bus 1 input, I've created a feedback loop, and if you do that, Pro Tools squeals in a very unpretty way. So if you make an auxiliary input, don't put anything in the sends. You will regret it very quickly. Okay, so we're going to put some reverbs up here. And I'm going to stick with the deverb. Now here's the trick. You want to choose mono to stereo. So what this means is there's a mono input, but it puts out a stereo spread. So I choose this, and now my mono auxiliary input just became a stereo output. Okay, I'm going to also put another deverb here. We're going to set them differently, but we're just going to leave it there. Okay, so I'm on the first deverb here. This is a funk tune. I definitely don't want to be in a church. I really don't want to be in a giant concert hall. I really kind of want a large room. I think that's probably a better place to start. Actually, let's put the large room over here in the second one. Okay, so I'm going to leave that large room alone. And then on the first one, I'm actually going to put ambient, and you're going to see why here in a second. Because of that, I am going to change the name so we can keep them straight. Okay, so that's ambience. I'm just going to ambi, and then the next one we're going to call hall. I'm sorry, room. Okay, that way we know what's what. Okay, now in general, just leave these up because you're going to control everything from here. So let's start by putting a little bit of, I want to put a little bit of ambience on the vocalist because I feel like she's like right in my face. I think I've lost my location. Yeah, I have.
I wanna go to heaven.
That's the wrong song.
Not before I live on earth. I don't wanna be. If you should discover you feel
Okay,
like
I want a
me.
little bit of room on her
If
voice.
you should discover this dream is
Not
for two.
Sorry, I meant I need a little bit of space on her voice. That's what I meant. I used room as an adjective, not as a noun. So I want a little bit of space on her voice. The chamber, the ambient one that I'm talking about, will do that. And watch what happens here. I'm going to click on the send, because this is my control for that.
Be If you should discover you feel
Oops.
like me.
Sorry, I gotta solo that too.
If you should discover you feel like me. If you should discover this dream is for two. I wanna tell you, boy, if I cannot have you for my own.
Okay, you should be hearing that there's a definite difference when I turn that on. It's subtle, but it just makes her be like that. Like, it just goes back a little bit. She's just not in your face. Now, let's put that in context. It'll make a big difference. So, I'm going to turn it on and off.
If you should discover you feel like me. If you should discover this dream is for two. I want to tell you, boy.
Right? Now she actually feels like she's part of the band. She doesn't feel like she's been pasted on top of the band, which is always a horrible sound. So I'm using that reverb just to, if you look at my little, the little picture of me up here in the right-hand corner, I just want it to go, boop. I just want to just put a little bit of depth on her. Now the room is going to make it feel like she's in a room. So let's leave it, I'm going to leave the, I'm looking at the room send. Actually, for the sake of this, let me do that. Okay, so this one on the right here, this is to the ambience, and the one on the left is for, I'm sorry, the one on the left is for the ambience, the one on the right is for the room.
If you should discover you feel like me. If you should discover this dream is for two. I want to tell you, boy, if I cannot have you for my own.
Cool. So I've got both a little bit of depth, and then the room gives me width. That's the way I think of it. The ambient pushes it back a little bit. The room gives me width. Okay? Again, I created, in my sends, a bus 1 out. Bus 1 is going to the ambient. Bus 2 is going into the input of this. And all your outputs should just be to out 1, 2 right now. That's the easiest way to do it. So don't forget, though, you have to make a an auxiliary input. Do not make an audio track. It won't work for this. You got to make an auxiliary input. Okay, so we've got this going. And the nice thing is that between these two things, I can mix and match. So the Triton So to me, the Triton has the room already, but it doesn't really have depth. It's like it's in your face and then the room is way behind it. So I'm only going to send bus 1 to the ambience. If you've got headphones on, or if you're in the studio listening on the Genelex, you might hear that the image of the keyboard goes like, it just gets a little bit wider when I turn on that sense of space. So it's actually giving me the thing I normally am getting from the room. That's because the room's already in there and it's just kind of emphasizing it. But it's just giving it a little bit more, to me, it's a little bit more realistic sounding when we do this. So I'm going to do that for you again. Opens up a little bit. Now, let's put that back in the mix. It should sound a little less plastic.
If you should discover you feel like me. If you should discover.
Okay, I'm liking that. Now, here's the third rule that works all the time. Do not put reverb on kick drum and bass. Nothing good comes of that. It just muddies up the kick drum and the bass. Just get rid of it. Don't even bother putting sends on it. Leave the bass and kick alone. Snare and the rest of the kick drum set, however, is a different story. So in this situation, it's the opposite of the keyboard for me. It was in a decent-sized drum room, so I've already got that ambience. I just want to make it sound bigger, like it was actually in a bigger room than it was. So I'm actually going to get rid of, I'm just going to at least make my first send inactive to make a point, and we're just going to use the room reverb send.
If you should discover you feel like me, if you should discover this dream is for two.
So if you're listening, if you noticed, listen closely to the snare. I'll get rid of everything else so you can hear it better. That's super obvious. Back off a little bit. Let's do the same thing with the toms, because toms like to be... I'm probably overdoing it on the toms, we'll see. Right? Yeah, just gives us a little bit of that room sound. Now let's put this whole thing together.
I wanna tell you, boy, if I cannot have you for my own, I'd rather be lonely and all alone. And I'd rather keep thinking the way that I do. 'Cause all I do is think about you.
Now let me do that without any reverb.
I wanna tell you, boy, if I cannot have you for my own.
Yawn.
I wanna tell you, boy, if I cannot have you.
Right? So now I've got a mix that I got rid of all my mud. I took care of my problems. Oh, case in point, with the exception of this little boost on the bass. Maybe in here. With the exception of that little boost on the bass and the boost in the kick drum, note that as far as EQ is concerned, I have done nothing enhancing. Everything I've done in EQ has been solving a problem. It's all been correction. It's all been high pass. It's all been getting rid of resonance in the keyboard. It's all been getting rid of resonance in her voice and that little 4K spike. Just like I said, you get rid of the stuff you don't like and you're left with the stuff you do. And then we just added a hint of reverb. As a matter of fact, if I go in here and I... sorry, I'm trying to remember this. No. Sorry, I'm trying to teach myself this new shortcut. There it is. I'm holding the command key if you want to write that down. If you hold on the command key and you click on the little thing here, it actually opens up these little faders for everything. Notice that I don't even have that much, heck, I don't have any of this going on. Make it really obvious. Nothing going on there, nothing going on there. Nothing going on the hi-hat. Nothing going on there. Yeah, so only the gray sends are even going to the reverb. I've only got 7 reverb sends total. 5 of them are into the room, and only 2 of them are into the ambience.
I wanna tell you, boy, if I cannot have you for my own, I'd rather. So
less is more. Just think about the decisions you're making and make sure that they're serving the song and taking you there. Now that we've done a little bit of this, this is a good start. Now there's some other things we can do here. Let's look at this. I'm going to do some kind of subtle things. So depending on what you're listening on, you might not hear it. If you don't hear it, I would suggest you write it down and you try it when you're in the studio with the Genelex. First thing I want to do is I think of the ambience as being just a little bit of space, but not only that, it's a very short reverb. If I go in the deverb, it's 100 milliseconds. Even that is, honestly, that's long. I'm actually going to shorten that.
You feel like me, if you should discover this dream is for two. I wanna tell you, boy, if I cannot have.
So I'm going to make it less than 100 milliseconds. Now, the majority of the meat in this sound is early on in the reverb. The problem is that the room reverb also has stuff early on. The pre-delay basically says that I'm going to put some space before the reverb starts. So a reminder, if I haven't said it, then I'm saying it. If I haven't, it's a reminder. Pre-delay basically simulates how long it takes for your voice to hit the first wall before the reverb happens. So let's imagine the room. Let's say that this room is 30 or 40 feet to fit a full band in it. Somewhere, 30 by 30, 40 by, squares are horrible for acoustics, but if we say that and the singer's not standing dead center in the middle, let's say she's 10 feet from the wall. So let's change that to 10 milliseconds, because remember, the speed of sound is 1,130 feet per second, which basically translates to a little bit more than 1 foot per millisecond. So 10 feet, 10 milliseconds, close enough. That actually will give us a little bit of space between, I'm going to go back and forth. That will give us a little bit of space between the reverb and her voice. Now, there's another little trick here I wanted to show you. Actually, I'll show you the compare thing later. I forgot. You kind of gotta, it's a little frustrating. So forget that I said anything. I'll show you a different way to deal with that. Anyway, so I'm going to go back and forth between having 0 pre-delay and having 10 milliseconds. It'll be subtle, but try to listen for, it should feel like the reverb separates from her voice a little bit.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is
okay, with that, it's a little separate.
I want to tell you, boy, if I cannot have you for my own.
Now, if you're listening,
I'd rather be
it's kind of right on top of her.
I'd rather keep thinking the way that I do.
It's almost in the way.
But all I do is think about you.
But if I add 10 milliseconds,
yeah, baby,
it separates her out from the reverb. If you're not hearing that, go a little higher. Try 15 milliseconds.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is for two.
Just for the sake of the example, I'm going to crank it so it's super obvious.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is
right. If you go too far, it becomes a delay, but it is called a pre-delay. But we're going to just put it, in the low teens, somewhere around there.
You feel like me if you should discover this.
Now, not only is it going to do it for that, here's the reason that this is I'm glad I'm showing you this. This is the reason that you put a reverb and an aux send, because I do this pre-delay, it moves it out of the way of the vocal. Well, guess what? That problem that the vocal was having, the snare drum and all of the toms were having that exact same problem. So with this one knob turn, I've solved the problem in 5 places. A lot of times I see students put a reverb directly on the channel. That's why it's not a good idea, because if I put this reverb here and I adjusted it, then guess what? Now I have to go back to the other 4 reverbs and I have to adjust them to be the same. It slows you down. It makes you a technician. You're no longer thinking about music. You're not listening. You're typing in numbers. If you wanted to do that, you should have been an accountant, right? So put your reverbs in an aux send. That way when you make a change, it's global. Because remember, I want all these instruments to feel like they're in the same room. And I literally want them to be in the same room, and I am literally using a room reverb. So by doing this, it should actually impact the entire mix, not just her vocal.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream.
Listen closely to the snare drum. You're going to see the snare drum has a little bit more space than it used to.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream.
Now, it's subtle, and I didn't point it out earlier, but I remember thinking when I listened to it at first that the reverb was kind of on top of the snare and it lost some clarity. But now that I've gotten that pre-delay into here to make space, now the snare has that space too, and everybody's happy.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is for two.
I'm going to throw out one more thing here, and that's that deverb is another bit of content, right? Reverb is another bit of content. It's more audio. It's like another instrument that you've added. So it's got a frequency element to it. It's adding frequencies. It's adding time. It's adding things that are happening. Since it is another piece of content, there is no rule that says that you can't EQ a reverb.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is for two.
right? So don't be afraid to even throw a reverb throw an EQ on your reverb and play with it. There's totally some cool things that you can do. So at this point, what I would do is that now I've got a nice little solid rough start. Now I would start experimenting. Actually, let me take that back. The next thing I would do is I would save, right? You can even do a save as and save another version. Actually, what I would do is I would do a save as and call it basic or whatever. Actually, this one would be my basic one. So let's do that. Save, because I'm happy. Class, that's the one that's mixed called class. Great. Now I'm going to save one, do a save as, and I'm going to call it class messing around, because now I'm going to play with things, and when I hit save, it goes to that session. Now I still have the session called class, so if I go crazy and I come up with a bunch of crap that I end up being like, you know what, that all sounds like crap. I want to go back to where I had before. So I just go back to the class session, and I open it up, and I'm good. And then I can go back to where I knew I was happy last, is actually the point of that.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is for two. I want to tell you, boy, if I cannot have you.
Now, if you're looking at this, my mix is sitting around the 0. It's exactly where I want it. Does it go up? Yes, it does. There's no problem with that. I want the average to sit around here. It doesn't mean it always has to sit there. It can go up and it can get quiet. I just want it to basically sit around here, which is what it's doing now.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is for two. I want to tell you, boy, if I cannot have you for my own, I'd rather.
So yeah, when she starts digging in, and there's some ways that I would deal with that later, but if she starts digging in, it gets loud. But I'm really about the right spot right there. Okay, I'm gonna jump back over and see what kind of questions you guys have. So I'm going to switch back over to Zoom. See what kind of questions you guys have. So I'm going to switch back over to...
You feel like me.
You can also create another... I'm going to create another auxiliary send, because I know this is the last thing I made. And make a delay. So we talked about this. Let's actually do it. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go to mod delay 3. Mono stereo. And then if you want to, put a little hint of this on your vocals. Now there's a trick to this, and I got just a minute or two to show you this, but this is something that I would suggest you play with too. So I'm going to make another send. We're going to go bus 3 input. Okay, we already did that before. That shouldn't be a big surprise. I'm going to go ahead and turn that up all the way. We'll deal with it here. I'm going to play the vocalist.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is for two.
Of course, you can just do that.
I want to tell you, boy, if I cannot.
But one of the tricks that's fun to do is I'm actually going to leave that. Well, yeah, okay. So I'm going to take one of these. I'm going to make this one slightly longer than the other. So one's 250 and one's 290. Not different by much, but since they're panned left and right,
You feel like me if you should discover.
Suddenly it gives you this cool, like, wide stereo thing. The other thing you can do is take your feedback and put it into, like, the teens. Maybe 10 to 15%. You don't need, it doesn't take much. And then you're going to get repeats.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is for two.
Right? So play with that. You can really create some sense of space. I can actually go into this.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is for two.
So you might be noticing that I didn't even need the reverb to have a sense of space now. The delay kind of does the same thing.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is for two.
Okay, so I just took all of the reverb off her voice and I'm just using the delay.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is for two.
Now, it's distracting because it's all the same frequencies that are in the main. So I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to be brutal with it. I'm going to high pass a bunch of the lows and I'm going to take out a bunch of the highs so that the delays are muted sounding compared to her actual vocal, and that way your attention stays on the main vocal, but you can still hear the delays. You get the sense of space.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is for two.
Right? So that's a lot of fun to play with too. So
You feel like me.
So yeah, knock yourself out.
You feel like me if you should discover this dream is